very, very welcome to our today's discussion, a conversation with Professor Jan Zielonka, whom I wish the most warm welcome actually to this event organized by the Foreign Policy Forum from Zagreb. I've known Jan Zielonka for I think 25 years, although we haven't been much in touch as of recently in between. But I follow with great interest, as I'm sure many of you do as well. His publications, which are many. Jan Zielonka is a professor of European politics at Oxford and Venice. He has published, from what I see, 16 books on European issues, and really very interesting, focused with the identity issues, with on the issue of a vision of what is Europe actually, what it might be, and what it can't be in a way. And this is also what is the main topic of our today's conversation, which whose title is "What is EU Europe now?" And of course, we are holding it in the aftermath of the elections for European Parliament, and before we actually see the new composition of the Commission and also of other political bodies relevant, or are they relevant really for the European future, the future of the European Union. So our concern and the main question really for today is, is there still a vision of Europe, and is European Union the same as Europe? After all, this is a long and old question in some ways, and how many visions there are on what actually is Europe at this particular moment, or are we, so to say, visionless somehow? Is the European Union becoming? Has it become just an international organization, a pragmatic arena in which various policies and politics of various countries are just interact without much of a vision about the future, without perhaps maybe the so-called joint values or anything like that sometimes Europe claims it holds. Let me just say that among this book, the books published by Professor Zielonka are The Lost Future and How to Reclaim It as of 2023, and then Counter-Revolution, Liberal Europe in Retreat, Is the EU Doomed as of 2014, Europe as Empire, The Nature of the Enlarged European Union, and so on and so forth. So good evening and very welcome, Jan. So my first question really would be, what is Europe? What is Europe now? I mean, is there something that Boris Johnson and Theresa May at some point started calling as Europe outside of the European Union? So the other Europe somehow, or can we still, when we say Europe, I mean, is it fair that we mean the European Union only? So how many Europes, in a way, at the moment there are?
Look, the only thing what is certain is that Europe is a woman. Nothing else is certain. With mythology, Greek mythology makes it very clear. We don't know which woman it is. But it is a woman, so at least there is some certainty here. But otherwise, anything goes. I remember once many years ago, after the fall of the Soviet Union, very when politicians from Kazakhstan tried to argue at the conference that they are actually in the center of Europe, not just on the outskirts of Europe. So it very much depends how you look at Europe. Is it a cultural entity, or is it a geographic one, or is it just a trade bloc? So in this sense, there is no very clear definitions. Where the Europe ends, as you know, is a tricky question. This is a tricky question also for the institutions like the European Union, which cannot claim to be European without telling what Europe is, yeah. But this is where we are. The very fact that only two republics of a former Yugoslavia are in, and the three republics of the former Soviet Union are in, tells you something about the criteria, which in the case of the European Union are purely bureaucratic. You can formally become a member if you adopt 20,000 laws and regulations, the famous or infamous acquis communautaire. But as you know, this is contested. When Morocco applied for the EU membership, it was rejected on the basis that Morocco is not European. Well, it depends how you look at the colonial history of Europe. There is new discussions about this evoked by Hans Kundai, my former colleague from the European Council on Foreign Relations, who basically argued that Europe was European integration was and still is a wide project. Yeah, so it shows you how much the issue is complicated. And just to be provocative, can you talk about Europe without Tchaikovsky and Dostoevsky? Yeah, you see what I mean. So this is where we are.
Yeah, I mean, we all remember times when there were two Europes, right? Western and Eastern, not very friendly to one another. And then we thought, I suppose, after 1989, there was a chance of one united Europe. But I think if we look from today's perspective, I mean, we see this Euro-Atlantic Europe and Eurasian Europe somehow. Right. Are they irreconcilable in a way? I mean, it seems at the moment really this war in Ukraine in particular is making it difficult to imagine Europe that would include, again, like both this Eurasian concept and Euro-Atlantic. It's rather either or am I wrong in saying that? I mean, it's difficult to imagine one in united Europe that would include for example, also, Russia. We now mentioned Tchaikovsky and Dostoevsky and the others.
To start with, I wonder where Yugoslavia was in this Europe divided between the Eastern Europe and Western Europe. Have you been part of Europe or not? I guess you felt part of Europe. So even at that time, when you could say the issue was fairly simple, bipolar, it was less simple that some people would present it, yeah? The same is today. We don't, formally speaking, we don't have war with Russia. We have a war with the Putin regime, which behaves in the way which is unacceptable, which basically breaks international law. And behaves in the way which we can no longer tolerate. But let's not forget, we tolerated Russian behavior for a long, long time, when Russia, even after Russia illegally occupied Crimea. And earlier on, by European member states, we courted the regime of Putin in various ways, knowing how it behaves in various contexts. So here again, I would be very careful. I remember a time when Turkey was very eager to join the European Union, and it was actually when Erdogan came to power. And he came, as a matter of fact, to Oxford for his first kind of big European visit. And I didn't talk to him, but I talked to his, close advisors. And they really meant it, and were willing to make a lot of concessions, and they were somehow refuted. I don't want to say that Erdogan would become a liberal politician had the EU been more welcoming. But it is legitimate questions from this perspective to ask who has lost. Turkey, yeah? Like you can ask today, what about Serbia? Uh, uh, so I really am kind of nervous when people have a very clear answer to your question. What is now for me very clear is that politicians who are winning elections in member states, they are all sovereignists, which means they basically believe that sovereignty is for real, is more absolute, so it cannot be divided. It has to be located in a certain place. And they, like like the British ones, by the way, want to take power back from Brussels to their national capitals. So a united Europe composed of sovereignists sounds to me a contradiction in terms. It sounds to me like illiberal democracy. I mean, illiberal democracy is a contradiction in terms. And United Europe, which is sovereignist, or as they call it, Europe of nation states rather than kind of bureaucratic, centralized EU run by by Brussels. It's for me a recipe for the old style of politics where basically when the states are in the driving seat, that sovereignty is not being shared, and basically everybody bargains about national interest only. But here we have to be very careful. While I believe that the main cleavage in Europe today is between those who believe in kind of liberal internationalist Europe and those who are sovereigntists, the design of European integration makes all leaders of all member states sovereignists by their nature. Because even Mr. Macron, which is, presented not only by himself, but also by his enemies as the most pro-European politician, right? He basically, when he goes to to the Council, he basically defends national interests of France. And I can hardly imagine that Macron one day will support idea of majority voting or across the board, because this would mean that he would transfer French government into local one in a European state. He's not going to do this for varieties of reasons, but this mechanism and this basically powers of the Council, which is superior to other parts of the EU, means that all these nation states go to Brussels to bargain their national interest, and and they do not do what de Gaulle do, leave the European institutions these days. Because de Gaulle didn't get what he wanted, nor do they do what the Brits have chosen, is Brexit, because they realize that the price of Brexit is too high. They want to have seat at the table and influence the union from inside. And Mr. Orban actually is the best example for this. He is a small, he's a big fish in a small pot, Hungary. But frankly, he's punching above his weight. He's getting one European concessions after another because he applies his veto. Recently, I don't want to be politically incorrect, but the European Union granted him, I don't know how many millions of Ukraine. I find it just absolutely bizarre, but this is how it is. Because you see, none of those heads of states who are sitting at this table want to be outvoted tomorrow for one reason or another. So there is a logic of this sovereignism built in the European integration projects as this is a kind of birth defect early on, yeah, that we decided that European integration is about strengthening nation states chartered by the Second World War. Beautiful book, of my late friend and colleague Alan Milward about the rescue of nation states. And we are still having these arrangements. Maybe I gave you too long answer to your question, but I just try to show you that certain things are not only because some politicians win elections here and there. There is a built-in system, or you can say birth defect, predicted, by the way, by people already in the 1950s, but people like David Mitrani, for instance.
Okay, I mean, it's very interesting that you actually use this parallel with empire for Europe, and I basically think I share this view as well. But I wonder whether you would consider, this empire of Europe, the European Union as an empire, to be something that serves its purpose rather well in terms of keeping peace and stability for relatively long period of time in a rather violent continent such as Europe was in the 20th century, exactly because it actually counters the danger of too much of sovereigntism. So there's a sovereigntism of nation states which would not have been connected within the European structure. So in other words, when you say Europe as empire, I mean, do you think that it's a good idea actually to have like a quasi empire such as the European Union in place, maybe as a kind of self-managing empire somehow, where everyone participates, where there is no emperor on the top, so that to be a response or an obstacle to extensive nationalism of nation states in Europe?
Look, to start with, there was from the start some misunderstanding about the notions of empire I propose in this book. When the book came out, as it happened, the president of European Commission met me and he said, "Yeah, I like, it was Manuel Barroso, you may remember." He came to me and he said, yeah, and I like this idea of empire. We can punch our weight with America, Russia, China. We will be in the, now on the par with them. I said, yes, President, but this is no medieval empire and not empire like the British or Russian 19th century, and so he immediately lost interest because he was interested in something else. He was interested to be in the big boys club, and my empire was an effort to understand Europe after the big enlargement. I studied this enlargement process for the close, and I tried to understand how this will impact on Europe. And my finding, basically, which suggested that this is, as all previous empires, enormous import of diversity, challenges the major paradigm of European integrations that we are basically on the way to build the European state. That did take time, but basically this is a kind of state building process, yeah. And I try to, we move from common trade to common currency, foreign policy, constitution, patriotism. You know, and I studied enlargement, figure out that we are going into the opposite direction. So for me, the medieval paradigm was actually more in the making than the Westphalian one. So this is how I look at Europe. So neo-medieval empire. I didn't put neo-medieval in the title because my publisher said this would look like a history book. So, but this was neo-medieval. I should add, after writing my last book, where I try to understand the impact of the internet on politics, I should say that this is a digital version of a medieval Europe, because it was, because enlargement was nothing compared to digitalization in making our continent flat and also running on a high speed. So what I want to say, this is not an empire very often people have in mind when they say Imperial Russia or Imperial Britain. Right? But I don't worry about this. You see, empires exist much longer than states. States exist, from 17th century only, and nation states, yeah. And empires existed for much longer. I speak to you from Italy, where the prototype of Roman Empire is very much in people's on people's radar. But there were, of course, many other types of empires, and those empires, not all of them were very strong. Some of them were weak in various periods of time. Even the Holy Roman Empire, which probably came closest to contemporary union, which I described at the time, had different stages of glory and the decay. So it is not like this that empire is always the big boy with the muscles, and trying to do what to put everybody in place, in particular those peripheries which are sucking them out. So there is a lot of misunderstanding about the term empire. What I wanted to say, and I'm convinced about this even more than when I wrote this book 20 years ago, is that although the formal powers are concentrated in the hands of nation states, the functional ability to fulfill various public functions is spread around. So there are various actors which here basically are able to contribute to public goods. Some of them are locals, like for instance cities, where majority of Europeans already live, and which are hubs which are animals from another planet. They're all big mega cities. Are all multinational bodies. They cannot run under national flag. They are dealing with problems in a totally different way the states do. But they at the same, if only because they became agents of growth and innovations because exactly of their transnational character, They are not interested in walls like states. Cities used to be interested in walls, but they lost interest for this for a long time. You don't know where those big metropolises end and start these days. And some of those units are transnational, like the EU, like a lot of NGOs, and so on and so on. So what I want to say that this discrepancy between formal powers and the actual ability to contribute to public goods is rising. And the only paradox of history is that this process is progressing, and we have now renaissance of nation states. So how come? And I think the explanation is very simple. The process of what I call unbounding generates efforts to rebound, because all those changes have winners and losers. And this progressive unbounding, partly because of integration, partly because of digitalization, partly because of globalizations and so on. This process of unbounding generate reactions of those who are on the losing side to rebound, yeah? Mm. And it was always like this in history, because actually the whole history of politics can be reduced to the interplay of those four factors, which is territory, authority, identity, and rights. And we are here in a different stage. This is how I look at Europe myself.
Well, we mentioned enlargement on several occasions. Now, of course, writing in 2006 and even 2013, after the Croatian joining of the European Union, I suppose we were all more optimistic than at the moment when it comes to enlargement. I mean, we are now really 30 years since since the ending of the war in former Yugoslavia. Even 2025 will be 30th anniversary of that. And more than 10 years since the last country joined the European Union. So do you think this project is still alive? So the enlargement of the European Union, is it just a kind of verbal something that will not be followed by concrete steps or deeds?
Look, I spent a lot of years studying enlargement, but after 2010, I stopped doing this exactly for the reasons you mentioned. Yeah. I thought, there is really not much going on in this business. Like I stopped studying European foreign and defense policy because I thought there's no progress at all. I read books, articles are always about the same, as if the word didn't change. But here are surprises, Yeah, I went to the Grand Continent First Annual Summit last December. The enlargement was the topic, with all Ukrainians, Moldovans, and others, negotiators, and basically I had a deja vu. I thought, that this is gone, and it is back. And it is back, even in the case of countries which do not meet basic criteria of joining the union, which is sorting out territorial borders. This was, as you know, in Croatia, one of the fundamental principles for even being considered to the European Union. But formal criteria apart, the dilemma is always the same. Is it better for your security to have those countries in or out? Yeah. And if you consider that it's more beneficial to have those countries in, you bend your criteria. This is how it works. And we have to be prepared for this. So this is as much as enlargement is concerned. Will it go further? I don't know. But but you look what was discussed yesterday at the foreign minister meeting. One is Ukraine and the other Western Balkans. And is at the top. This is what these people are busy with these days.
Well, we all remember, for example, this big debate about whether America is from Mars and Europe from Venus. You remember? I mean, it was 15 years ago, I think. Now, how would you assess this relationship between the United States and the European project? I mean, we had Trump's presidency, in which we saw some of these signals that maybe there was no much love or even friendship left between the European project and the United States. Now, we don't know what the outcome of American elections will be in November, but do you think America and EU are firmly on the same side on major issues of global politics, or do they have different visions?
I think your interpretations of our relations with Trump administration is biased because I happen, to be Polish, and I know that President Duda and the Polish government had a perfect relationship with Trump America, and they are dying for these people are dying for him to win again, to get back. So it depends who we are talking about, right? And I can very well imagine that my prime minister in Italy, who now has good relationship with Biden, will have equally good relationship with Trump. So, I don't know what about Mr. Macron or Scholz, but let's not have any illusions on that. Because and so had Boris Johnson very good relationship with Trump, because sovereignists basically are on the same line as Trump about international relations. This is a bargaining, this is given in, and this is not any multilateralism and us being binded by any laws or agreements, and it's a sketch as sketch can, right? And so this is more or less how will we be. But it remains to be true that the results of elections in America will be as important as the results of forthcoming elections in France. There's no doubt about it. For the European project, yeah, for the European project.
Mm-hmm. So what do you expect? I mean, in France, do you think a major change is forthcoming, or will France remain in that course as it is at the moment?
No, look, I'm not a prophet, so I don't know who will win these elections. But the very fact that we can get Mrs. Le Pen winning is telling me where about the health of democracy these days, where democracy can lead us to. And let's not make mistake. This is not another Mrs. Meloni. Mrs. Meloni, with all the party which we all know where it comes from, and still cultivates certain traditions of which I'm ashamed of. She was part of establishment. Let's not forget, Mrs. Meloni was minister already in Berlusconi government, and the former boss of this party, Fini, was a very important part of the ruling Italy for several years. So what I want to say is that this will be much bigger shock to the system, not only because France may be more important than Italy, but because this is something what everybody assumes will never happen. But it happened, like it happened that Mr. Wilders won elections in Holland, and you don't know who will win elections in Germany tomorrow. But whoever wins those elections, there is one thing clear, that that the narrative and political behavior has dramatically changed over the years. So basically, the whole notions of integrations, globalizations, open borders, and let's go further, human rights, division of power, and all those things are gone. And there is a new narrative of a national interest, not the rule of law, but law and order prevails today. And in the European context, we have to face that after 70 years of European integration, which was supposed to get rid of nationalism, we have the greatest outbreak of nationalism in my lifetime. And I'm nearly 70. So it tells you something, where we are. So this has already changed. The whole narrative and practice has changed. In Poland, there is a law debated. Basically, one of the versions of these laws gives or could give the license to kill to soldiers on the border, against migrants. I mean, this was unthinkable some years ago. And now it happens, by the way, not only in Poland. We now have evidence of what the Greek coastal guards were doing to migrants and so on. So these are things which will not end because tomorrow somebody is in power. You have Mr. Tusk, Prime Minister of Poland, and campaigning on, I'm going to bring Poland back to the European Union. And he's a former boss of the European Union. And on issues like Migration Pact, Green Deal, or majority voting, he says, I'm not interested, and votes against. And this is Europe we are living in. And this is European hope, one of the leaders of the largest party in European Parliament.
Yeah, I mean, to end this part of a conversation before we open the floor for others to ask questions as well. I mean, you wrote this book in 2018 on liberal Europe in retreat. So do you think this is still continuing, or is there a chance that, faced with obstacles that you've just described and the situation of challenges to human rights and some basic liberal values, that there will be a bouncing back somehow of liberal Europe, so that the liberal Europe might actually be inspired to reorganize itself and to somehow respond to some of these new tendencies?
Yes, there will be bouncing back, but the question is when and what will happen in between. You see, I've never seen sovereignists having any success in government with issues even like migration, because migration cannot be stopped on the wall on the coast. It cannot be stopped on the border proper. It can only be hindered by addressing the roots of migration. What are the roots of migration? War, poverty, climate change, right? But we are doing nothing about this. Why? Because first, you need concerted efforts of many actors, not just states, and over a longer period of time. Then then from one opinion polls to another. So governments go take shortcuts. See, this is in a way, and this is what I write about in my last book. This is a democratic problem, because what we have today is that democracy is tied to the territory of nation state, because this is where democracy is, and it is prisoner of voters of today. So so politicians will always make pictures with children during election campaigns, but when it comes to decisions where to put resources and reputation on stake, they will always go for shortcut, and therefore this explains why we time and again adopt new headline goals for climate change, and we break it time and again. This is why all governments promise to do something about indebtedness, and they never do. They just increase debt, so and so on, because simply this is the inbuilt problem of democracy. Democracy is myopic in terms of space and time. And with the internet, which basically made the world flat and accelerated everything in the way, unbelievable, democracy doesn't, is either suspended, and I would say we have emergency government in European countries since the financial crisis, and there was always some crisis. So all democratic procedure was suspended for the very simple reasons that there was no time for them. People expect from democracy not just to be representative, but also sorting out their problems. And you cannot sort out the problems, and the beautiful example is artificial intelligence. When those people creating, engineers and even entrepreneurs like Musk suggested 6 months pause in development of artificial intelligence to give states time to to regulate a little bit, they said no, thank you very much. We're not interested, because even national parliaments wouldn't be able to meet and regulate something in 6 months. And we've got a very weak kind of artificial intelligence acts in the EU. And you know what is the entrance date of this act? 2 years from now. You know where artificial intelligence will be 2 years from now? I mean, get real, eh? This is where we are. So it is not only because of this and this politician, because this affects whoever is in charge of democracy these days.
Okay, thank you so much. I would like now to invite our participants to maybe comment or ask questions if they wish so. So who would like to be first?
If I may,
Dragan, yeah, please.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you very much for your lecture, Professor. I personally think that one of scenarios how Europe can survive, it's looking towards its south, to the southern shores, which is sort of global south as well in that broader context, and it's Africa. You are lecturing now in Venice, as I know, so you are part of this as well, Italian political scene. We are witnessing, if I'm recalling well, this Matteis plan, the last try of Meloni's government to do something with Africa and to be the strategic point of Europe or European Union towards Africa, and to do something. At the same time, buying autocratic regimes' efforts in Egypt or Tunisia to stop the migrations, which is one of the biggest challenge of modern Europe. How do you perceive this European stance or connection towards Africa, and how perhaps you might explain through all these years complete lack of strategical stance towards the continent, which could be sort of savior, but of course with strategy and some kind of, I would say, strategical and leadership position of European Union towards Africa, where some other players, as China, we are seeing that Russia in a security or security-wise position are already doing in Northern Africa again. Thank you.
First of all, the interest in Africa is not being shared, and including North Africa. if you go to a country like Poland, they don't want to hear about Africa or Middle East or North Africa. They're obsessed with the East, yeah. And so what you had over years within the European Union, you had this two dimension, the Eastern and the Southern. And the Eastern, for one reason or another, maybe because Germans are a key actor here, prevailed, or maybe because Putin was a bigger threat than Libya. But so even if we assume that the key to European security and welfare is in the south, and some people in Italy think this way, this is not being shared. And we can discuss why it is not so, right? Is it basically mental map of those people who are just Eurocentric and cannot, think that there is anything outside Europe? Is it because of the
I think we have maybe lost the connection. Right. Professor Zielonka, can you hear us? No. Okay, let's wait and see whether, I'm sure he will come back.
this?
Yeah, okay.
You got me back?
Yes, welcome back.
So this is one thing. The second thing is that even if there would be opportunity, we have a record of basically screwing everything we were doing in those countries. And I'm not talking now about the colonial era. I'm talking about recent era. Because we, time and again, particularly I'm talking about now North Africa, sided with dictators to make sure that they keep migrants away from the shore. And because we were obsessed with migration. And it ended up that we became kind of easy target for blackmailing by those people. Each time money ended, we gave them. They demanded more, so we gave them more. And since these were usually always dictators, which we were dealing with, then the people rebelled against them at a certain time. There was civil war. Then we intervened, like in Libya, and then withdraw, leaving those people in the hands of local warlords, and of course, generating even more migrants than before. This was a disaster. And we've never learned anything from this. Never, ever. We basically abandoned development aid. We abandoned investment, serious investment. There is, of course, some development aid and investments, but this is nothing, comparing to 20 years ago when, for instance, the whole idea of development aid was in vogue. And so most of this money exactly go, I remember after Arab Spring, I went to Tunisia, which was at the time the only state which was democratic. And I asked people what the European delegation is doing, and the European delegation was only interested in keeping people away from the shore, Mediterranean shore, even though those people in Tunisia tried to convince them that the major border is with Libya, which is totally open, when all terrorists or warlords and everybody could cross, and they will control Tunisian politics and so on. And in fact, a week after my departure, there was a big terrorist attack in the center of Tunis and so on. So our record of dealing with those countries is just appalling, and we never learn anything from this. Unless you will convince me that if we will give to some dictators, in Tunisia, as Mrs. Meloni now with Mr. Rutte arrange more money, the outcome will be different than when we were dealing with Ben Ali and other dictators in the previous generation. I'm old enough to remember this. They were doing everything. I remember Mr. Berlusconi, saying that Colonel Gaddafi is our greatest friend, yeah, and kissing him and inviting him, and so give me a break. Our record is disastrous, and we never learn anything from this, and we will pay the price.
Thank you. Further questions, please? Božo Kovačević, yes.
Good that there is a new question. I thought I put you off so much by this militant answer to the last questions. But I really, when I have to judge this diplomacy in North Africa, at least, I want to cry simply.
Yes, Božo, please.
You said that you are not studying intensively the enlargement process anymore. But anyway, I would like to ask you something about. As we know, Ukraine, Moldova, and Bosnia and Herzegovina got candidate status. So it seems to me that giving them that status, candidate status, European Union is given promises it can not fulfill. I mean, people from those countries have expectations that accession process will help them to solve their main problems. In case of Ukraine and Moldova, it's problem of territorial integrity, and the similar problem is in Bosnia. In fact, central Bosnian government cannot impose authority over Republika Srpska. So be candidates. People think that process of accession will help us to solve our main problem. In my opinion, it's mistaken. I would like to know, what do you think about? Second question. You have mentioned that President Macron basically is a sovereignist. Okay, if Mrs. Le Pen is elected on next presidential elections, she is sovereignist too. So regarding to European Union, where is difference between them? And I would like to make only one short objection regarding causes of migrations. You mentioned that common explanation that war, poverty, and climate change are main causes of migrations, and I would agree. But I think that we could look at the problem from different perspective. Let's bear in mind that the main message of global liberal international globalization was freedom of movement of money, capital, of goods, and of people. And when people all around the world tried to use that declare freedom of movement of people, they were prevented by states who were promoting those three freedoms. Freedoms of movement, goods, money, and people. So developed countries do not want to allow freedom of movement of people. It's my opinion. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. There are a lot of questions here. I don't know when I will remember all of them. the issues about Macron and Le Pen, I mean, the bigger difference is he's liberal, she's illiberal. And he's kind of soft sovereignist and she is hard sovereignist. But so these are the differences. What I wanted to say is that you know, in a way, Mr. Macron, when he was running for president first time, I read his book on Europe, you know, and where I thought the title was with Europe, but it was all about France, you know. So, but this is the nature of European politics. You know, you basically is key players are member states, and this makes them sovereignists by nature because they are supposed to defend national interests. This is why they are elected. Oh, you see, my dog is seeing our cat outside, and his dog is getting excited. Carol, basta, basta. So,
Okay.
I'm sorry. Come here, Carol. Come to camera. Show how polite you are. And now, migration. I'm more than happy to talk about migration, but you see, this is a big topic. I only will say two things. First, migration is as old as humanity. Read the gospel, and then you understand that migration and everything which comes with this is not new. Second, what I wanted to say that people migrate for other reasons that our policies, you know, this pull and push effect, you know, I know, but people don't risk life and life of the children, you know, just because they read the, you know, kind of declaration, you know, declarations of last European Council, yeah. And the EU was never really particularly open anyway. Yeah? I can tell you this because I have experience when we were not part of the European Union. You know, so it was not ever welcoming people from outside. If it was welcoming those who are rich with money and so, and not those who, you know, don't speak languages and just flee because of other reasons, right? Or just flee to have a better life, yeah. So so here we have to distinguish the things, you know. Yes, the rhetoric was open borders, but these open borders were never so open. You know, the national borders were supposed to be abolished within the European Union, but the Schengen border was supposed to be strengthened. And yes, the EU doesn't endorse pushbacks, but it certainly doesn't want states to allow anybody to come in. And if Mrs. Merkel has done this in 2015, is that she, unlike Mr. Urban, understood that the only way to stop those people is to shoot at them. And imagine that the German governments decide to shoot at these people. You know what would it mean? I want to in Croatia, it would have some kind of a historical reminiscence, right? So happily, you know, she's now being criticized by doing this by everybody. But frankly, to take a different decision at the time would be disastrous, not just for Europe and these poor migrants. It would be disastrous for Germany. And I'm pleased she understood it. And maybe she understood it because she was from East Germany. So, look, I don't want to say that I know how to solve migration problem for the reasons I mentioned at the beginning, that this is a problem with all this humanity. But what I want to say is that to believe that you can handle migrations on the border is just totally you know, for the birds, because you cannot stop migration on the border. You know, Britain left the European Union to handle migration, and you know, and they don't have open sea border like Italy, you know, or you have border with Belarus where this migration is manipulated by Lukashenko. They have just border of the canal with France, and they are unable to handle that. You know, come on, give me a break. And all these politicians saying that they will fix migrations on the border is really, for me, a populist, you know, empty talk. And I wonder how long people will be buying this, you know. And but I'm afraid they are buying this in Poland in particular, because there is this war, you know, psychological situation of a hybrid war, you know, that we are on our side, we will be next. Which leads me to your first questions. I will be brief. Look, I have a feeling that we started politics as more or less the same time, right? Which means many years. And if there is any law I learned in my life studying politics, is that politicians have no problems of breaking their promises. Okay, so and in terms of the EU accession, you can ask the Turks, yeah. I'm not really believe that we are prisoners of our promises. On the contrary, you know. I mean, this is the easiest way politicians do, you know, to break their promises. There are problems, you know, exactly as I tried to describe. Are we enhancing security by taking those unstable states in, or we are importing insecurity? Are we basically, this is the real problem. And we don't have in the European Union any foreign security policy. Our only foreign security policy is enlargement. I'm sorry. We tried after the Balkan War in San Malo, you know, EU decided to have this 60,000 troops on the call, you know, and by 2003, the so-called Helsinki headline goals. And where are those 60,000? Eh? So we don't have. So we can either rely on Americans or we can basically do enlargement policy, because other policies we don't have. I'm sorry. We can impose sanctions, but as you learn, and you shouldn't be surprised, sanctions don't win wars. You know, they have symbolic meaning, important. But you know, so this is where we are. We don't have other policy instruments. And we can discuss whether enlargement is successful policy instruments in those cases. We can discuss this, because the very fact that it was successful in case of Croatia, for instance, or Poland, doesn't mean it will be successful tomorrow. But other policies, other instruments we don't have. This is because the EU is that kind of animal. You know, when I have a first lecture to my students on Europe and European integrations, I show them, you know, the pictures of different animals. I show them a giraffe and I show them a lion, and then I show them a bird and I show them a fish. And what I try to tell them, that if you are fish, you are better to do things in water than whether you are a lion. You know what I mean? And that there are birds who can dive, I know, but still, you know, and fishes who can fly. But basically, all these animals, they have certain characteristics. And this is why I talk about Europe as empire, because I believe that if Europe is empire, it has different characteristics than a state. And this was in the context of this debate.
Sure. If there are no further questions, I mean, maybe we should end with the question of one of your books, and is the EU doomed? It's a book of 2014, right? How would you answer it from today's perspective? I mean, we criticize the European Union a lot, and including, for example, you obviously, I mean, in your writings and today, but at the same time, I mean, a lot of people think it's something that is almost unchangeable and inevitable. It will not go away. It will stay, even if we don't exactly know why and what for. So it's a fact of life somehow. It has become, I think, for the last decades, and maybe for some of the citizens of the countries that are not in the European Union, as we all remember, it's also an object of desire, right? We need to be there for our national purposes. So, for example, to strengthen our own power as a state or something, to be treated as equal as others, to be recognized as normal, to end all these transitions and so on and so forth. So do you think the European Union is somehow here to stay, even if we can't exactly, even if we say, you know, there are no policies, you know, they look like a fish that flies or something like that, and maybe people don't pay too much attention on this? What would be your answer today to this question?
No, here I have two comments. One is that one kind of or the another transnational actors is necessary to sort out these problems which are transnational, and we have more and more of those problems, yeah, and more and more of those problems. And therefore, we will always have a kind of organizations which will be more or less functional or dysfunctional to sort out these problems. And the situation is because there are a lot of things which are better handled by states, other things better handled by local actors or non-governmental actors, and others which required concerted efforts, some of them on regional basis, and this is where the union is necessary, and some of global basis, right? So we will always need something, you know, however called, to deal with those problems, which nation states cannot sort out on their own, however powerful, like Germany. The problem is how will it work? And what we have now is that because we are unable to change the treaties, we basically have the union acting very much as a network, an informal way. And forms differ from the issues. You remember when there was financial crisis, how is called ECOSOC, you know, the Council of Minister of Economic Affairs, or Finance Ministers, they acted in a totally informal way. You know it from the book of Varoufakis, when Varoufakis asked him, why do you ask me to leave the room? I'm here, finance minister of the member states. They said, we're informal organizations and we adopt our rules as we go along. You know, so and in the end, fiscal compact was they adopted a treaty pushed by Sarkozy and Merkel. It was called Merkozy Treaty, against the will of other members of Eurozone, because they didn't want this to be a part of the European body of laws, because they were afraid they will not get support of non-Euro member states and so on. When there was pandemics, they acted, you know, totally differently. You know, at the beginning they closed borders. They said the EU, it doesn't have anything to do with this. They closed border even for the import of medical equipment within the single market. You remember how it was? But then very quickly they realized that the national borders are not of interest for COVID. And because the borders which are important are the local when there is outbreak of the virus, you know, sometimes it's such small places like Codogno, you know, here very close between Florence and Venice, you know. And they also realize that if they want to have vaccines, you know, they'd rather not compete with each other because it will end up with rich countries getting vaccines and poor ones nothing. And they also so the commission actually didn't have any experience to negotiate with big pharma. They negotiated it a little bit as potatoes with limited results, and certainly not in a transparent way, because when European Parliament asked von der Leyen, could you give us a record of negotiating these billion euros deals with big pharma? She said, no, I don't have, because I did it on the WhatsApp and I deleted, you know. so this is how much about democracy. But this was necessary, you know, and democracy, when thousands of people are dying, forget. So they do it, and then when they had to deal with the price of COVID, you know, for enterprises, that created this post-COVID recovery fund, you know, and it allowed me in Italy to transform my house into solar energy, and I don't have now anything else by the solar energy. Even the car is being charged for this. So you see, and my house is not so important, but all these enterprises which took basically the money, they would be busted if they wouldn't have the support of the European Union. So what I'm saying to you is that none of this was in European
Ja to ne
treaties.
znam kako se radi. Što je?
I didn't get it.
No, sure, that was some outside noise. Yeah.
What I want to say is that none of this was in the treaties, but they had to be, these things had to be done. So if the union wouldn't be there, it would have to be invented. But the problem is, of course, now that the more the sovereignists the hard sovereignists will run member states, the less it would be possible to sort things out. Because what we have today is that you go to those European meetings and they don't solve any problems, because they prevented collapse of European banks, but you know what the price was. And do you believe that the tomorrow will not be the next crisis? Well, nobody believes, unless you believe that Greece will pay its debts after how I don't know, 2 or 3 bailouts. If you believe, fine. We didn't solve migration problems unless you believe that Mr. Erdogan will sort it for us because we gave him a lot of money. If you believe in this, fine. And you know, we basically with Russia and so we have absolutely no idea how to deal with this unless you believe that taking Ukraine in and imposing some sanctions will sort things out. So what we do is basically we adopt suboptimal decisions which allowed us to muddle through. This is the speciality of politicians, muddling through. But it is like applying aspirin to serious sickness. I love aspirin when I have a headache because I drank too much yesterday. But when you are seriously sick, aspirin will not do. And this is our problem. And not only we don't know, we don't want to do any serious things, we don't know how to do this. You see, and so it will, in the current sovereignist, illiberal Europe, which is in most parts of the continent, I expect things to get worse before they can get better. But maybe our students will see better times, and I wish to be wrong, but I fear I have no evidence to support optimistic optimistic scenario, because this idea that Europe gets out stronger from each crisis is basically for the birds. I've never seen this in life. We get worse with each crisis, not better.
Okay,
And
on
you
this note, with sorry, yeah.
No,
please go
no,
ahead.
that's it. But it doesn't, I don't want to say this is the end of the world or so.
No, no.
But have you seen this film, an American movie, Don't Look Up?
Mm.
The politics today reminds me more or less this movie. This was not a very good movie, but it was pretty realistic, you know. And when Le Pen and Trump are elected, it will be interesting. Let's put it this way: it will be more interesting than the movie.
Well, on this note, thank you very much for your analysis and for this conversation, and also for ending in something that is a moderate pessimism, I would say, after all, not really very harsh and extreme, because you've justified, you've explained this framework within which the European Union is still useful. It's just a matter of how to, in fact, continue and process to develop it further in given circumstances, which you've described in through this rise of sovereigntism and also this crisis that are multiple in a way, somehow, that the European Union at the moment does not seem to have the response to, if I've understood right. So thank you so much for the conversation and for this opportunity. We look forward to reading further your analysis in various publications, and also to further books. I mean, I really must say the titles are really great and the ideas are important and also challenging in a way, which is what we really want and appreciate in the academic world and beyond. Thank you so much.
I hope we will meet in person sooner or later. I
So
visit
do I.
Croatia, but never Zagreb. So, you know,
if
so
you're
I hope we will
coming,
be able to debate those things directly. But I'm
sure.
used to Zoom meetings, and and I thought it will die out after COVID, but it flourishes still, so it's better than nothing. It's like with this aspirin. It's better
But-
aspirin than nothing.
But we all hope this will change, and we will see you in Zagreb soon. And let's stay in touch and organize something for our students, but also colleagues and so on and so forth. It will be really good to see you again in
And
person.
good to see you. Some people I know work of, but never met before. All the best.
Great, thank you. Bye.